Marco Codes! Hi folks, Marco here and welcome to this How to Do Code Reviews episode. So I've been working on the Google Photos clone, and in the last episode I mentioned, help, I need somebody to send in a pull request. And not even 24 hours later, a super awesome user called Phil sent in a pull request, a fair amount of code. So now that we have a pull request, we also need to review it. And along the way, we're going to learn a lot about how I usually do code reviews, what is or maybe isn't important for me when I do them. And we're also going to learn that code reviews have only partially to do with code, but maybe even more so with human relationships. What does that mean? Well, let's find out. If you haven't seen the last episode yet, here's a summary of what we're trying to do. We have a Java application which runs ImageMagick on the command line to extract thumbnails out of pictures. And in order to do that, it needs to detect the specific ImageMagick version that is installed on the machine. Now, what we did is we just ran magic -- version in the previous episode, and it gives me this big output here and says version ImageMagick 7.1 is installed. When I look at my Java code, however, I can see that I kind of winged it, because I'm indeed running magic -- version here, but I'm only looking at the exit code being 0 at the moment, and then just assuming ImageMagick version 7 is installed. Ideally, what I'd like to do is not only execute the command and check for the exit code, but also pass the output, or more specifically, the first line, because the first line contains the version ImageMagick 7.1 something. So I cried help, Phil heard my calls, and he created a pull request with exactly this functionality. So I got this email notification that a new pull request came in. Where do I start? I'm using IntelliJ and I'm trying to do as much as possible inside IntelliJ. Obviously, if you're not using IntelliJ, you could go to github.com and, review your pull request there, or use whatever, tools and flows, workflows you like, whatever floats your boat. For me, I'm just going to use the view pull request feature, and I can see it's kind of an empty list. It only has one pull request inside, so I need more help. But I can see this is my open pull request here, read ImageMagick version info from the command output by iCantar, I hope I said that right, which is Phil. Now let me open up the pull request. And it's all a bit squeezed in because I'm zooming in for the video. But in any case, I hope you get the point. We can see that Phil filed a pull request against branch episode 2. The title, we just saw that, and he created a super nice description of what he did and why he did it. Now, I'm not just, usually I would read through the description and recommend you do it, but I'm not going to wait here and snore away until you're finished. Rather, I want to go straight to the code. And for that, what I usually do is I simply check out the pull request to a local feature branch. I'm now ready on the feature branch, and after I closed all these tabs here, I can get to work. All right, so the first step for me in any type of code review is to see what effectively changed. Now, I unfortunately already closed all the windows from the view pull request feature just a second earlier, which showed me these files. And now I'm on my local feature branch. So what I can do is quickly compare my local feature branch with the episode 2 branch to find out again what changes came in with the pull request, right? So this view, it doesn't really matter too much, but in IntelliJ, you can see here at the bottom which commits exist in my feature branch / pull request, but don't yet exist in episode 2, right? And there's one commit from Phil, and you can see on the right that 4 files changed. The blue ones got modified from app till ImageMagick test Java, and the green one, a test class, got added. Now, what I like to do is I just like to give all these files a quick open just to get a feeling of, how big the changes are. So literally from top to bottom, what I'll see is I'll quickly scroll through. I can see with the green here, a fair amount of code was added. Blue, a fair amount of code here on the right, got modified. And that is enough for me. I didn't even really check the lines of code. I just want to get a feeling of, the amount of changes. When I look at the other files, I can see, there's only one line that changed, and I can see an enum changed to a not null, and I'll keep that in the back of my head. And then the test class here is the same thing, actually. It changed from an enum here to not null, also just keeping it in the back of my head. And then I can see that, here's a test class with a fair amount of new code. So I have one test method, I have another test method, and just some data which is being prepared for these test methods. And this just gives me the feeling, okay, I have a test class, which I will have to run in a second. There's some tiny changes in these condition classes, but we'll have to spend most of the time in our app.java class reviewing what was added and modified there. But first, let's run the test. All right, step number 2 is running all the tests that, in this case, Phil created for his pull request. Let me just run the whole test class, and I can already see that everything is green. But let me emphasize something. From my own experience in the past, whenever someone shouts, "I'm done, here is my code," oftentimes I don't want to give it a set percentage. When you run the tests, or it could also just be, manually clicking through a big UI workflow, whatever you have to test that everything, works as expected, you find out that things are in one way or another actually broken and not working as expected. And that before doing the full code review, you should actually do another round of fixing up the functionality. That's why I like to, as soon as I have some tests, let's run them first. Or do, manual UI testing. Obviously, it depends a bit on what you're working on. If it's just an algorithm, so to speak, or if it's like a UI-based project. Run any tests you have, make sure they're green, and then continue with the code review. Step number 3 is not so much an actionable step, but more of my philosophy whenever it comes to code reviews and code syntax/code style. Because most of the time it really doesn't matter, or it's just a fruitless discussion. Let me show you what I mean. Obviously, when you have stuff like white spaces and whatever have you, you have to, before you commit and push code, you should run, whatever your IDE offers you that automatically reformats the code, or maybe even moves, public methods on top, private methods to the bottom, and, just rearranges your code style, respecting a code style which essentially exists across your team, or maybe even your company or your department, whatever have you. But this should be done by an IDE. And what I include in that is, for example, Phil checked in final var version equals something. Now, I'm a big fan of the var keyword. I know there's plenty of enterprise Java programmers who go, "Ooh, the var keyword, how could you not use an explicit type?" I frankly don't care. Just use the var keyword. And if all your teammates in your company decides, well, please only use explicit types, then by whatever means, use it. But in our project, I'm a fan of the var keyword, so we're just gonna, we're gonna keep it. The final keyword, on the other hand, I personally don't really like it. If Java had a val keyword, which is final var, I would use it. But other than that, I would just, save these 5 characters or so. And I've had plenty of discussions about the final keyword in the past for local variables, for method parameters, whatever. My personal opinion is, to not have it. At the end of the day, get together with your teammates and decide on, what is good, what is bad, code style wise. But don't fret it. At the end of the day, these tiny things don't really care. And as I'm the dictator in this tiny Google Photos clone project, we're going to go with the var keyword, and we're just going to leave out the final keyword in the future. But other than that, we're not going to spend any more time on code style for now. Now, let's take a second and reflect on what a code review ideally, what should be the goal of a code review if it's not code syntax and code style. And I have a rough guideline for everything I'm doing whenever I'm writing code or whenever I'm reviewing code. And I know that some of my very good ex-colleagues and friends made fun of me in the past is I have this saying that I want to write as little code as possible to satisfy a given, user requirement. And I think that it's a bit over the top, but every line of code is a liability. I have to think through it. I have to maintain it. I have to refactor it whatsoever. And the best line of code, the fastest line of code, whatever is the line of code I haven't written. And this goes a bit against, my builder genes where you want to write code. But in fact, what I try to do in code reviews is I try to get rid of lines of code. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that I want to make sure I should have done it much earlier at the beginning before writing any code. But still, I want to, double check, is the code that we wrote actually, Does it satisfy the user requirement? Is that actually the thing that the user wanted? And yes, again, we should have done it before writing the first line of code. But even after, I want just to quickly double check, is that what the user wanted? And we'll see in a second that maybe we could interpret the parsing the version output in different ways. And number 3 is there's this emotional human relationship perspective with the code review. Because, code reviews don't just happen in a vacuum. So you have 2 people or even more people, reviewing a piece of code. And usually there's also some sort of, let's say, corporate structure involved. Now with Phil, I don't know him. It's a pull request. And I'm not his senior. I'm not his junior whatsoever. But if you work in a new company, doesn't matter if you're senior or junior and you post your first pull request or code review, you might be scared of, what do my colleagues think of me? Will they take away my bonus because my code sucks? And what about the response? Is it passive aggressive? Is it constructive? Is someone talking down to you? Is it a collaborative environment? And in fact, what I try to do is I try to get my emotions out of the picture, trying to get the best code up and running, where everyone hopefully agrees. And yes, obviously, if I'm in a company in a senior position reviewing junior code, I will steer the direction. I will give my input. But especially with when multiple senior people are talking to each other, I've seen it in the past, and I'm not just saying that. There have been so many bad, emotions in code reviews where people felt disrespected and where people had many negative emotions, that all I'm trying to do is be positive, don't say my suggestions are the best suggestions in the world. Ideally, I would, do a couple of rounds with Phil and tell him about my suggestions, which won't work in this case here for this video. But this is what you should do. Be open-minded. Don't be super defensive or overly aggressive. Let's just try and forge, a true, honest relationship, which frankly is sometimes much more tricky than producing the actual lines of code. All right, it's finally time to do the actual code review and to delete some code. I'm going to start with the test class. That's what I usually like to do. And I just want to see if I can, refactor stuff here, delete stuff here. But first of all, let's just quickly understand what the test is doing. So we're basically, trying to parse the console output of the ImageMagick version command. And I have one test method here where it says can parse ImageMagick output. I have another test method down here where it says from ImageMagick output returns null on invalid versions output. So that looks to me here one test method for the good case. We can parse the version, and another method for the bad case. Let me just see if that is true, because both methods, they have method source parameters, which means there is a method which creates these version info test data wrapper objects that get fed into the method. Now let me just quickly double check. Yes, here's the method. And as you can see, Phil created a couple of wrapper objects where you can see the version info test data with the specific console output from the console and the corresponding Java object. 3 different ones, and these are all valid version lines. Now when I scroll down, I can see there's also a method source method where I have invalid version lines, and supposedly these should lead to a null version later on. But what else do we have? We can see that when we look at how the comparison is done, we pass the ImageMagick version from output, and then we say the version should not be null, the major version should be equal to the expected major version, minor version equal to expected minor version, the patch version, and so on and so forth. And there's an if-else, where when I'm just looking at it, I dislike if-elses in test methods. But ideally, my sentiment is I would like to have this simpler if possible. And by simpler, I mean that let me just, copy and paste some code. That's what I usually like to do, copy and paste some code. And then the method could be called parses ImageMagick output correctly. Now, what does correctly mean? Well, let's see. The method source, I'm going to rename it to strings to versions for now. And I'd like to get rid of this version info record. That would be the first couple of lines of code I'd like to save. Ideally, what I should be able to do in JUnit is say, here's my console output. So this is the first parameter. And the second parameter could very well be my expected version, just, saving on this wrapper object. And that's actually not a problem. What we can do is, let me just, copy and paste some more code from down here. This helper method constructing, the test data. I'm just going to put it up here again. I'm going to rename it to strings to versions. And then the only thing I have to do is not return an array of version info data, but I have to return a stream of arguments. What that looks like, we'll see in a second. Welcome back. What I did now is use, return a stream, and there's a GUnit helper method arguments.off, which I can call with as many arguments as I want. And I always want to put in a string first, and then, the expected version later. So I just, reduced the code down here, which returns the array of the version info test data, and got rid of that. It's a tiny improvement, but let's see if we can still make it better. Because if we have it like so, and if we have the string console output up here and the expected version, shouldn't my test ideally only be one thing? All these comparisons, they should kind of work automatically. So maybe just have an equals method on the version, which compares major, minor, and patch and whatever, and not have these if else's in here. So I'm going to delete this here. And I'm going to make sure that actually my test should be assert that the from ImageMagick output, whatever I pass from my console output up here is equal to the expected version. That ideally expected version. That ideally will be my test. And while we're at it, I don't like these long names from ImageMagick output. I would just, do off. So, saving a couple of characters. Now, we have that here. We have our test and we have our strings to versions for the good case. But can't I just, for example, take the bad case as well? I'm just going to pick these three here and simply add them up here in our method. I think we can. Look at this. Doesn't it look nice? Now we're just saying, well, the second argument, in case you can't parse it, should just be null, right? So it's just going to be another argument in the arguments off call. But by the way, even more so, let's have a look at the version class again, and it's actually a record. And record means it does, it will have automatically a nice equals and hashcode method implemented, and we're just having basic types here, so int major, int minor, int patch, and the optional. So effectively, our test here should just work. Let me try and run this. It's going to take a second. And yay, I can see that, in fact, the versions got passed correctly. In the cases of, these upper three lines here, I got the correct versions out of it. And in the case of the lower three lines, I just got a null version, is equal to, has no problem with null handling. So effectively, this code here, these lines of code here, replace not only my version info test data, they replace my good test here with all these assert that methods. They replace the, the bad case test here. They replace the helper method down here, and they replace the invalid output helper method down here. And this now satisfies my hunger for code deletion, less lines of code. I think this class now looks pretty nice. What do you think? Leave me a comment down below in the comments, please. Let's continue. All right, let's continue with our code review. And I would like to continue with the version record here, which something I noticed when cutting and pasting the code. The version record at the moment has the fields major, minor, patch, and the build version. And when I'm opening it up, you can see those fields, and you can see there's a regex here. And in the off method, what supposedly happens is we have the string, the console output, and we run the regex against the string. And then we try, to pass the different versions out of the matching regex groups. This is completely fine and valid code. The thing is, I was super fuzzy with my requirement. In the last episode, I said, hey, please pass the version output out of that command. And the way I'd say that most developers would interpret that requirement is to take this line and, in fact, parse out major, minor, patch, and build versions. The thing is, what I'd like to do is, in general, I'd like to err on the lazy side of things. For now, my program, my application cannot make use of minor patch and build versions, only of the major version. And yes, it's completely my fault. I should have said that at the beginning. But for now, I only want to have the code that, passes out the major version. I don't care about all the other versions now. It could be different, maybe in 2 weeks, maybe in 6 months, or maybe in 6 years. And then I'll have to worry about that. For now, I only want to worry about the major version. Now, what does that mean? What could our code look like again? In fact, what I would like to do is I would like and try to return our version back into our enum. And I can delete the fields here. Right? My enum would look like something like this. So not available again. Then I am 6 and I am 7. Right. Then I can delete my regex here because I want to find a different way of parsing the information. And in fact, I can delete the code from my of method here, and I'll show you my super dead simple implementation of that method in a second. Here we go. This is it. It is so simple. It's just 3 if statements. That's the amount of code, of the complexity of the code my brain cells at my age still understand. So we put in a string. If the string is null, then we just return not available. If the string starts with version ImageMagick 7 dot, then we assume it's ImageMagick 7. And if it starts with 6 dot, then we assume it's ImageMagick 6. It is less complex than the regex version. It's also not as complete, not as feature complete, not as valid, but it still works in this case. I want to be as lazy as possible again. Right. Let's have a look at the related problem now after refactoring. That is right, because what we did is we now don't have these versions anymore. But in fact, what we have is version.im7. Right. This should be version im6. This should be version im7 again. Sorry. And then down here, this should be version 7. This should be not available because there's no dot here, right? And then this is also not available. Just like that. Let's run our code and see if this still works. No, there's a tiny compile error. That's right, because now we, in our production code, so to speak, we don't have, we don't compare the major version anymore of the public of the record. In fact, this should be IM7 like so, and this should hopefully work. Now let's rerun our test. And boom, everything is green. That is quite nice. So now we got rid of the version record and we made our of method a tiny bit simpler. That also satisfies my delete code requirements. Again, let me know what you think of that refactoring down in the comments below. All right, so that we don't get lost, let's quickly have a look at what my current directory looks like and what the differences are compared to my episode 2 branch, right? Because we've done a fair amount of work, but there were still some changes in the pull request I want to have a look at. So, sure, the test class, we added the test class in our new version here, that is fine. The ImageMagick test itself, right, there is something. So what we actually have, we changed it to is not null in my version. But in fact, now detect version doesn't return null anymore. It returns a specific version again, and we can, revert this change here. So this change is gone. The condition I had in the back of my mind at the beginning of the video also that something was changed to is not null. And again, we can revert the change to is not available because we're now working with the enum again and not the record. So these two classes are now completely identical. Two identical classes, a tiny new test class, which leaves us with app.java. And here I think a couple of things changed. What has changed, let me just see, is the detect version method. The detect version method is the last one we have to look at in the scope of this code review. So let's actually close down everything and do it. All right, so here we go. Here is the detect version method. Now we have an array of commands that we want to execute to get the version, magic -- version, convert -- version. And then we loop through the commands and use the rather convoluted Java way, which is the only way to do it, to basically attach to the process's output which we get as an input stream, and then, create a buffered reader, an input stream reader on that input stream, and then read the lines of the output through that reader, find out which line starts with version, and then take it from there. And somehow, I'm maybe not the biggest fan of this for loop here and, how the code is structured in general, but I also know we need most of these lines here because that's just the way to do it. But let me just dream for a second and have a look at our old implementation again. Yes, so this here on the left was the old version with the if statements too. I'm just going to take this piece of code and I'm going to put it right next to the current version. I'm going to call it detect version 2, very nice. And then let's see if we can make the code down here look a bit more like the code up here. Now, the thing is, we have a run method, right, which just runs any command we want and returns the exit value of that command. And by the way, in the new version, that run method was basically unused and it was just sitting here doing nothing. Let's see if we can somewhat revive it. What we need is not just the exit code, we also need the full output of the program. And we could change the run method to kind of return that. Let's do it. And the quick fix for this is, having a record process result, which simply has two fields, exit code and output. And what I did is I changed the run method to now return a new process result instead of just the exit value directly. Putting in an empty output for now because we have to take care of the output parsing in a second. But for now, my run method returns a process result, which means when I go down here in my detect version 2, I need to change things a tiny bit. For starters, let's use the var keyword. The var result equals run magic dash version. What I want to do is I want to say if the exit code is not 0, not successful, then I'm going to immediately run the next command like so and say result is the output of my second command like so. And then I can delete everything here because the only line I want to do at the end is return a version of, remember the method we refactored, result.output. That's it. That should ideally be my version. And again, it's just a simple, run this line here, no for loop. And then if the line fails, if exit code is not 0, then, run the other command. And then whatever, result you have from either of these two commands, just return version of result.output and it gives me back the correct version. Now let's take care of the last puzzle piece, the last missing puzzle piece. And it's the output parsing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this line here, these couple of lines here, creating the new reader. And then already I'm going to delete the whole detect version method like so. Rename this to detect version. So the code should still hopefully be working. And I'm going to go up to my run method and I'm going to paste the code in here, right? So I'm going to start the process. There is the reader here, which I have to construct. There's no way around it. I'm trying to get the line. By the way, we're going to do it a bit differently because we're going to collect all the output of the entire process. So we're going to create a new string. We are going to have the line, but we also need a string builder equals new string builder like so. Then we're going to read the line. As long as we get lines, what we want to do is we want to say builder append line. Like so, that's it. And yes, there's a tiny naming clash, so let's rename it to this should be the output builder. And then at the end of the day, we don't want to return empty output. We want to return output to string, which also means, by the way, and now I'm already getting a bit tired. This episode is growing rather long. I need to put the string builder here like so. And let's double check it. We start the process. We have a new string builder for the output. We put the output at the end in the process result, which is fine. We create a new buffered reader, and then we just go through all the lines. While we get new lines, we append them to our string builder, and we're good to go. We're almost good to go because what we did previously is we inherited the IO for our, command line process, and I don't want to get into the details of that now. We need to change this a tiny bit, or else process get input stream will return null. All right, this is it. We just need to make sure to pipe the output to our program and not inherit it. But that is a topic for a different time. Now, this is all the code changes I wanted to do. Let me just double check. Detect version now looks like this. Running the 2 commands and just, parsing the output with our starts with parsing mechanism. The run method is now being used again. It can be reused, in other ways where we just, want the full output and the exit code of a program. And other than that, nothing really changed. So just double checking, we have all these changes, and now it's time to make sure, does any of what we just did, what we just refactored, does it still work? Let's run all the tests in the package. As you can see, the ImageMagick test is working. Yes, it's green, so ImageMagick is installed. It detected that ImageMagick is installed. The thumbnail creation works, a test we wrote in the last episode, so the thumbnail got created correctly, and also our ImageMagick, version parsing works as expected. So everything still works, which is super cool, and that means our code review is now finished. Or is it? What's left to do is to communicate my proposed changes / suggestions to Phil and have a friendly discussion about them, and not just, close this pull request and push my changes onto the branch. Let me know what you think of this code review. What do you think of the code changes? Would you have done it the same way? Would you see it differently? I know with my super fuzzy requirement of, what parsing the version number actually means, we could have interpreted it in many ways. But still, let me know down below in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Sayonara.